Welcome to today's social system mapping deep dive session for April 19th, 2021. Today we have, Christine and Kara are your usual hosts, and we have a wonderful guest host today, Sarah Shanahan, who's one of my favorite co-conspirators in just about everything. For those of you who are new, we do 3 sessions a month. The first one focused on just an introductory level, sharing somebody's map. I think next time we have Mary's and Ryan, so that should have been on the slide. But so Mary Roscoe, who's with us today, is going to be sharing the map that she's been deeply involved in for quite a while on the second Monday of May, the 10th. On the third Monday, we always have a deep dive conversation, which is digging deeper into some special topic related to social system mapping. And today it's going to be the concept of visualizing funding and or resource flows in a social system map, which is why Sarah's with us, because that was her big sort of thing to talk about. And then next Monday, we have Tech Talk, where we will be introducing the new CSS editor. So for those of you who don't like your colors in tiers 3 and 4, you'll be able to change the color scheme of your sumApp instance, which Tim has been quite playing with a lot and enjoying a lot. So we have lots of other ways of learning about social system mapping, and Kara will be putting links into the chat for you to for different resources for learning. All these links will also be included in a follow-up email within the next 48 hours, including an email of the recording of the session. There's also a place where you can get all the past recordings online, which Kara will be putting a link to that in. And if you're stuck or just want to bounce some ideas off of somebody, I have office hours once a week on Thursday, 5 to 5:30 p.m. Central Time in the US. And sometimes I cancel in Slack. Okay, today's agenda. We're going to do a welcome. Sarah's going to share her curiosity, why she wanted to have this conversation. We're going to do some brainstorming and Mentimeter, and then we're going to look at, we're going to have a conversation about what's common that we see in the brainstorm and what's different. And for those of you who are new, we always do, the session is designed to be an hour. So we stop at the top of the half of the hour, and for those who need to move on, we say goodbye and have a good day. But everybody who's interested, we have an optional half hour that's just informal. So if you get to the top of the hour and you have time and you want to continue the conversation, just don't jump off at the top of the hour, and you can stick around for the optional extra half hour. Okay, no, we're not doing that. Sarah had a different, right, Sarah? I think you were.
I'm ready. You can go ahead and stop sharing your screen.
That's what I'm going to do. There we go.
Perfect.
Okay.
Hello. Welcome, everyone. It's really good to see so many faces, new faces. I don't know everyone here yet. So first off, I do want to thank Christine and this whole community, because even though I've been doing some social systems mapping for the ReAmp network for a couple of years now, engaging in these conversations when I can, I still find great value in it. So whether it's, an intro OnRamp where we're seeing somebody's map, or we're having a deep dive like we're talking about today, I just really appreciate the community on all levels, because I really find it as a great source of inspiration and networking. Before we really kind of dive into the conversation about funding flows, I'm going to talk about what kind of led me here, as Christine mentioned, my curiosity around it. I'd like to go around and just do a quick round of introductions. So just introducing yourself and maybe just a quick sentence on what brought you here today. I'm going to do some serial prompting here to hear from each of you. So Mary, can I hear from you first, and Mario, put you on deck?
My name is Mary Roscoe, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been interested in mapping for over 5 years. I think, Sarah, today's session has to do with funding, which is sort of a puzzle to me. And so that's why I'm here.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Mario, let's hear from you next. Janos, I'm going to put you on deck.
Yeah, I live in South Africa, which is the most unequal country in the world, and therefore most in need of development. My PhD research was on entrepreneurs in rural areas that help people to use the internet. We call them village operators. You can also call them infomediaries. And I looked at their social capital, their relationship networks, to see where the heck do they manage to survive as small businesses. So that's where my journey started around about 2012.
Great. Thanks, Mario. Janos, let's hear from you next. And Jim, I'm going to put you on deck.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm something like the citizen science researcher. I try to figure out a new kind of social network based on semantic web technology, build the knowledge sharing new version with the support and the social business background. And also interested in this kind of networking technology in a multi-layered system. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Jim, let's hear from you. And Brian, I'm going to put you on deck.
I actually didn't know what the topic was today, but I show up because this group of people is stimulating, and the deep dives are always a place I love to go. I started looking at things from the network perspective in maybe 2012, 2011, and it's been in the last 3 or 4 years working with Christine and this crew of people about thinking about networks in the perspective from the bottom up. I think it's a super powerful perspective, and I continue to learn. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Brian, you're up. Rebecca, you're on deck.
Good morning. I'm Brian Dowling. I'm a retired economic development professional in the California cities. The last 10 years, I've been getting into systems thinking, and recently I've been getting into the California Donut Economic Coalition, and I'm interested in participatory budgeting as well. So those two things make this seem a good match.
Great, thanks. Rebecca, you're up. Christine, I'm going to put you on deck.
Sure. I'm a professor at the University of Texas School of Public Health in Houston in the Texas Medical Center, and I have conducted a number of network analyses with an organizational focus, also trained people in network analysis, and continuing to show up for these because I am working toward actualizing the vision of making network information more useful to members.
Thanks, Rebecca. Christine up, and Anita on deck.
Thanks, Sarah. You're so good at this. Christine Lai, I do some work with foundations and funders, and so this one's particularly interesting to me as we're actually in the process of trying to figure out funding flows for a few spaces in the future of work and also in the future of economics and governance. So actually understanding who the players are and then how they fit with each other to make it more visual for funders and grantees. I'm still trying to figure out the dynamic, different language, if anyone has different language for funding and grantees, but really curious about today. So thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Christine. Anita, let's hear from you next. And Seth, let's put you on deck.
Hi, I'm Anita Shervington. I'm actually based in the UK, Birmingham in the UK. I'm interested in everything everybody else has said they're interested in, so I'm here to learn from people that know more than I do. I think it was Jim that said bottom-up networks. I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the engagement networks between universities and their local communities, especially more, let's say, the communities at the back of the line. And yeah, to understand that ecosystem so that more grassroots people can infiltrate that in a relational, positive way. And that includes looking at how, resource mobilization, including funding and things like that, how they move around, who they move to, who they miss out, and that kind of thing. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Seth. You're up next. And Mauricio, let's put you on deck.
I'm Seth Horwitz. I work with the American Friends Service Committee, the AFSC, based headquartered in Philadelphia. We are a Quaker-based peace and social justice organization, and I've been working on a number of different network weaving projects. Currently working on something involving Central American migration actors. I was involved in these sessions a while ago and kind of dropped out coincidental with the pandemic, and wanted to come back in and get re-involved, and this looked like an interesting one. And so this is my reinitiation back into the group.
Great, thanks. Mauricio, let's hear from you next, and Hector, let's put you on deck.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Mauricio Núñez in Cusco, Peru.
Go ahead.
You're good now, Mauricio, you're good now.
Go ahead, Hector. All right. Sorry, bit confusion. Well, for this dialogue happened to be 1-year fellowship with RSF Social Finance and Integrated Capital Pathway to Deep Social Problems. So I've been fascinated by social systems mapping and eager to exchange and get insights from this dialogue.
Great, thanks. Hector, let's hear from you, and then P. Fair, let's hear from you afterwards.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Hector Tui from Guatemala. I am working here with indigenous communities. I teach human ecology, and I am very involved in system thinking and trying to bring indigenous worldviews to system thinking. So thank you. Morning, everyone.
I'm Paulette Fair, and I'm with the Kepler Institute. We are a grassroots organization here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we do youth development, but in 20 years, back in 2003, we started with the summer youth program for our own teenagers. I mentioned that to you because in that 20 years, we have expanded those children. Most of those youngsters stayed in the program. They're now 30. They've gone off to college and they've come back home. So you can imagine what you're doing here just caught my eye, me and the executive director, as I was just perusing through emails for him. He's site challenged. I have to read all his emails. Being the executive director, somehow you guys landed in his inbox. I think it was like Thursday or Friday last week. And we said, well, let's look and see what this is about. And when we looked at it, this past weekend, I read everything that I could find that you all had on the website. From the intro, from you, Christine, because I remember the face in the long braid. From you, from everybody. And I mentioned about the 20 years. I mentioned about the young people. I mentioned about the young people in our group. And I mentioned about the young people in the group because these are 20-year-olds in college, out of college, about to get out of college. Thought leadership. No matter, of all the grassroots things we do, we working on an impact fund. We got a food thing going to bring farmers food to the community. We do rain barrels, but you see, of all the things that we do, thought leadership will perpetuate and sustain the efforts that we're all in. And this is about thought leadership. Call you back, babe. And so so you can see I'm all excited. I'm a newbie, but I'm ready to suck it all up.
Well, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. What a diverse group of people we have here today. It's pretty exciting. That makes me even more excited for the agenda that we have together because it's actually going to be pretty interactive for some of this. We're going to do some crowdsourcing. But first, let me share a little bit about REAMP's context and why I said, hey, you know what? I want to talk about this with this community of practice. And, you know, one of the things that we have found, like this social systems mapping work is really powerful. And when I thought about like, what is it that makes it so powerful? It's really about seeing is believing. I think it's really just that simple. So I can think of a couple of stories from REAMP's perspective where seeing in the map, seeing the network itself, it really, you know, helped people believe. It helped people think about the network differently. We use it during an orientation, for example, and during that orientation, you know, people's eyes just kind of go, they open up and they widen. They're like, oh, this is what the network's about. And they're inspired to start thinking about ways that they want to connect. We also have done a couple of mappings where we were looking at what type of work people were doing in service of our work to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions. And we always had a sense that we were weak on transportation, but when we saw the difference between transportation and power sector work, it was that seeing is believing, and it really motivated our network to make some changes. So, you know, it really, all of this has really got me wondering, you know, if seeing is believing, how could we map resource flows in our network to help our network really think about how we're putting our money where our mouth is? So in REAMP, we have 6 values that guide our work. Those values are collaboration, community, democracy, justice, equity, and scientific rigor. We also have this big, bold, audacious North Star goal, and that's to equitably eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest by 2050. And we are a regranter. And one of the criteria for regranting is that, is this working equitably with impacted communities? So, right, this value, this purpose around equity is something that's very near and dear to REAMP's work and how we're going to make a difference in the world around us. But it led me to wonder, like, are we actually putting our money where our mouth is? I don't know. I think to some degree we have some sense of that. But, you know, again, like going back to this idea that seeing is believing, you know, if we could map resource flows in our network, if we could map and see where the money or where the in-kind resources are going to in our network, would that help our steering committee or our funding committees make better decisions or help make more informed decisions because they actually know where the resources are flowing in the network? Again, we have a sense right now, but seeing is believing. So it got me wondering, could we actually do some mapping around this that these audiences, our steering committee and our funding committees, could use to really help them reflect on their decision making during times in the network, during certain times in the network. So that's really kind of the setup and framing for today. Like, that's my curiosity. But as we got to talking about this, you know, there was a lot of questions that came up. I know for REAMP's perspective, we're predominantly interested in money as a resource, but there are different ways that we may think about resources in the network. So what we want to do for the rest of this agenda is we're actually going to be using some Mentimeters to, we're going to ask you 3 questions. We're going to ask you to add some thoughts of your own to the Mentimeter. We'll be able to use all that and collect that as a group. We're going to do some crowdsourcing of that information so that we can reflect a little bit. And we're going to reflect and see what each other are saying. What are we hearing that's similar? Like, what themes are emerging? What differences are we hearing? And we can then think about what we want to do with this information. This is really just an exploratory conversation. We may not necessarily get to like some answer at the end of this, but hopefully it just opens up all of our thinking or inspires us to start to do some work around resource mapping, because I don't think anybody's really done this or really done this in a way that they're like, nailed it. So maybe we can get there. So Christine, we're going to do some Mentimeters, right? And I'll just ask each question, right, once, and you're going to drop the link in there and people can add their thoughts.
So Sarah,
right?
how this will work is Kara just put the link into the chat, and yep, okay. And so I'm going to share my screen so you can actually see what people are putting in as they're putting it in. So once you've so if you've got a way to look at both screens at once, or you can put it in and then come back to this so you can see what other people are saying as well. And I'm sharing my screen. Can people see my screen share?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, it looks good.
Yeah.
It looks good.
Yeah.
So we're going to just give you a couple minutes right now then to answer this question. Go into the Mentimeter, whatever comes to mind, go ahead and throw it in there. But when we talk about resources, what are resources to you? What do you think of as resources in a network?
And I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment because I forgot to do something, and then I'm going to come back and share it again. As soon as, maybe, can I? No, never mind. Sorry.
And how about we just give folks maybe one more minute to add your thoughts to this question, and then we're going to move you into the next question. Well, it looks like we have some pretty robust ideas about what resources might be in the network. So let's move on to our next question, which is kind of a so what, why? Like, why do you want to know this, right? How does this type of information or how does this type of mapping, how might it help your network? So why do you want to map resources? How do you think it might help your network? Let's just give you another 30 seconds to write in any last thoughts here. All right, and maybe let's go to the third question then. So besides the why, like let's sort of move into a now what then? You know, just any ideas that you have today of how you may implement this, right? What ideas do you have to implement a resource mapping?
Should we also be seeing the same results that Christine has shared in our view?
Yeah,
of
you
the community?
Yeah.
You should.
You'll get them in a minute if you're not. So yes.
Yeah.
If you have that, I mean, I'm screen sharing, so you should be able to see them as they're coming in.
Yeah.
But in a moment, I will share the link with the PDF of the results, and we'll all have a moment to look at those as well.
So we can't see it on our own.
You could see it on your own right now if you go to that when you go to your Zoom screen share window.
Oh yeah, no, I meant on our own.
Oh yeah, you can. Yes, I
Yeah.
thought you said can't. Yeah, you'll see it in just a minute.
You're going to in about 30 seconds here.
Yeah.
So yeah, why don't you just take a few more seconds here, write in any last thoughts. And what is going to happen is Christine is going to get a link for us so we can look at all of these results, you know, on your own. And what we're going to do is, once that was ready, we're going to share that link with you. And we just want you to take maybe 2 minutes of silent reflection. Just look, as you look at what other people had said and what you had wrote to, just start to think about like what themes you're starting to see, maybe some stark points of difference that you're noticing. We're going to have time to come together as a group to you know, talk about this and to jot these out. But for the moment, we just want you to look at it and just silently reflect on your own for 2 minutes, okay? And Christine just chatted out that link for you, so you can open it up. And like I said, we're going to give you 2 minutes of just quiet reflection before we talk about it and before we start taking notes.
Is everybody able to open it, open the PDF? Okay. Great. Sarah. You're muted. I went ahead and Kara just went ahead and put the link to the table doc. So if people are ready to move to the next step, they can, but we'll keep silent maybe.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I was diving into the results myself, so I was like getting all caught up in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just set out the Google Doc. Thank you, Kara. So what I want to invite you to do now is, again, I think this is maybe just a little exercise on your own for now before we enter into some group discussion. But in the Google Doc, you will see that there is a table. Each person should choose their own row. So you can go ahead and, you know, again, as you're sort of reflecting on what you're seeing here, again, like if you're seeing something similar in terms of what we have crowdsourced as a group, you know, take some time to jot that down. If you're noticing something that's really different about some of those results, feel free to jot those down there. But again, like, let's just do this on your own for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to kind of follow this into larger group discussion. And we will take notes during that group discussion as well. So just know that you don't have to have pressure to write if you don't feel like it. All right, are folks feeling ready to have some full group conversation now, or would anybody like a couple more minutes of silent reflection? Okay, I didn't hear anybody calling for a silent reflection, so I think it's okay to maybe open up here to a full group. Christine, might it be easier? Should we stay in this, or should we show what folks are writing here in the?
So
I don't know which is better.
Yeah, screen. I'm thinking screen share the table, or else just have a conversation, or not screen share at all. Let's just not screen share. What do you?
Okay, let's stay in conversation then. Nope, that's totally fine.
And let's just have just so Catherine Alexander, I think, has joined us, and I'm not. I didn't notice when they came in, and so let's just put the links to the. Kara, if you could put the link to the. I just want to make sure that they have the the table doc and the results so they can look at them.
Yeah, I was
Mhm.
able to do both.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting me know.
Awesome.
Thanks, Catherine.
I came in at the perfect time.
Good.
Well, yeah, so I mean, this is just an open conversation now is what I was going to suggest, you know, just sort of what are people seeing or anything interesting coming from what you're seeing in the notes. I will say one thing that I noticed that I thought was interesting is that there seemed to be some agreement around like the quality of relationships as being an important resource to track. But I didn't see that relationship piece come through as strongly in terms of why, right? I did see one comment about like increasing connection and growth and the implementation of it. I didn't really see anything in there about looking at those relationships. I found that very interesting. So there seems to be some agreement about why you would like what you would want to track in terms of relationships, but in how that's showing up in terms of like who's going to use that or how you may like implement that or gather data around that. I didn't really see a lot about that. And I just thought that was really interesting.
So so let's try what stuck out for anybody else in terms of either what were the commonalities in the Mentimeter results, or what either was surprisingly not there or felt different. Just anybody.
Sorry, because I have to go now. I'll just quickly say my bit. I've got a certain evaluation framework in my head, and I'm glad that some other people share it. So I'm very keen at people go at complex interrelationships in systems, and they measure all kinds of indicators, which I don't know what the usefulness of. And I think that mapping provides, I've tried it before in terms of selling the concept in my own organization. They were a bit too, let me put it this way, the wrong person resigned at the wrong time. It always happens. But anyway, so I'm dead set at getting funding for this. So I've already made a few comments and so on. So I think that's the way to go, especially to focus on what contributions and what kinds of contributions are different parties making to an outcome. Because all the funders claim all of the outputs, all of the outcomes to themselves only. They alone save the world, you know?
Yeah. Someone able to take notes just in the Google Doc? Add some stuff. Kara, do you mind? Can you do that? Okay, thanks. I started a cell of Mario's comment. Other thoughts? Other things that stick out or surprises?
What I put in there was, I didn't see anybody appreciating the amount of assets available as reflecting the value that they offer and the value that they are. So I think, I know when we've done asset mapping in neighborhoods here in Spokane, that was actually the major point, is to get the neighborhood to understand what it owned, what it had access to, and to appreciate itself in that way, and to appreciate the assets in the neighborhood in a new way, to see them as assets. So the sense of identity of the group doing the mapping and the assets being mapped.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Mary, I saw you had your hand up too.
Okay. I think of funding as being sort of linear and very restrictive. And so I was pleased to see this ecosystem of resources, and sort of wondering if more types of capacities, assets, resources are mapped, whether it would help with funding in terms of seeing organizations having a rich ecosystem, not depending just on the financial funding. I'm not sure I'm being articulate here.
Jim.
Yeah.
Thinking about what Mary just said makes me think about, I'm not seeing any thought about like sort of a gift economy mentality. I'm thinking, I came into this thinking about flows and getting things to where they need to be, but I wasn't thinking about what happens when to the relationships when you create a gift economy where there's an accountability as you give a gift and receive a gift, and the kind of relationships it builds, and the thought of just not just flows that you're managing, but like wanting to build the community together through gifting. I'm thinking Robin Wald Kimmerer, braiding sweetgrass.
Oh. I also didn't see people as history.
Can you say a little bit more about that, Catherine? What you mean?
There's something, I have a bias, but there's something about age and length of time and experience that is an asset, and is often overlooked. Just having more history, more experience in that space, that is an asset, and it's often overlooked. I don't know what else to say. And that usually resides in people. I mean, we see people as disposable, but they really aren't. And especially when they come with levels of experience that you can only gain over time. That's the only way that happens.
I think I'm going to comment. I think for me, one of the biggest puzzles in, we've been doing this work for several years now, and the puzzle of the power of funding to promote or stop promoting any kind of social change or any kind of relationship is so, I mean, for me, that underlying power to either support or just by omission thwart efforts at seeing and utilizing all of these other, it's just like money is like this big veto power in a way. And even because the people who are most in need of change or most motivated to make change are the people who usually are the least resourced in some way, people for whom the status quo isn't working. But at the same time, they need to make a living. So it just feels like there's so often that this chicken and egg thing about funding versus actual just self-organizing becomes a problem. I just see it over and over and over and over again in networks. And I'm trying to think about how can we surface that problem and actually look at it and have meaningful conversations, because so often the people who have the funding in their hands, it's if something starts to happen that isn't serving their purposes or what they want to be happening, if the outcomes are different from their outcomes or in some way threatening to undermine their outcomes, they just can pull the plug and it's over, and then everybody disperses. So yeah, there's a thing about that for me, I'm really trying to understand how to like sort of decouple the power of funding from the power that we all see inherent in networks, so that it can be more generative but less able to harm, which is obviously really abstract. But
contact with you, I think if we mapping the trust and the value flow, maybe we can find a new money system.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because on the money at the moment is also on the trust, and if a cryptocurrency also based on the trust. So we can find a new version for this.
Yeah.
And power also. I think sometimes I've been in situations where the funders' criteria really distorted the process
Mhm.
and made it either difficult and sometimes impossible. They had criteria that really were not naturally easily met in the situation, and having to meet those criteria really undercut the capacity of the project to actually produce the results you want.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something.
Mhm.
Yeah. What sorry, I just can't see. I'm actually using a phone, so I can't see everything properly. But what was just being said, so the lady before the last lady that spoke, that really resonated for me, and in fact the power piece, because what brought me to be interested in public engagement in research was actually seeing how powerful it could be as a community organizer, how powerful it could be, you know, on a community level when we're coming together and looking at how we improve our communities. I felt that it was a missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle, that on that table when we tip out all the tools we have, that was missing in terms of us using research, having researchers, that kind of thing around the table with us. And then discovering that actually there was a world of that going on in quite a social fashion around public engagement, where now you can, you know, well, I'm talking over the last 10 years, you can go to a pub, have a pint and listen to a researcher and have a conversation and build networks and potentially work together and all those things. But that actually was only for the people who were already in that sphere, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I wanted to do was look at ways of, initially I thought my role was to try to kind of whisper in ears and nudge a little bit and work with the people that were doing, you know, charged with doing that work, to look at how they could be more inclusive, to include more people in it. And particularly my work focuses particularly on Black communities in the UK. And what I began to see, that although in principle people agreed with the idea of inclusion and all that kind of stuff, in practice and in terms of, you know, people's proximity and relationships and all those things, that actually I knew that I needed to get on and lead some stuff on my own and do it in a different way, which I call a flipped engagement approach, where it starts and stays in the community and we reach out to the sector to invite them to co-create rather than the other way around, because it helps to level the playing field. But in that process and over the years, the way that I've you know, mobilized others to, you know, give their time, talent, and where possible, treasure, right? If we're talking philanthropy, it's not just about money. That actually I've been drawing on the people nearest to me, which are family, friends, people in their neighborhood, and anybody I can connect with. That in the end, there's been an overtaxing of people's time and labor to make this work, which is really, really inequitable, because other, you know, researchers and you know, we have all kinds of people in terms of their values and things like that, but at the end of the day, people who are paid to be there, right, and know how to access funding and things like that, and speak that language. And I call it this, you know, secret life of trees, what goes under the ground, and the extent of those networks that we are not part of. We get to see the tree and we know there's roots there, but we don't get to access how things work because we don't meet the criteria. And actually in the last, particularly, well, more than 12 months, but in particular, I've realized the extent to which I've also become part of holding the inequality in place by you further extracting that time and resource from people that literally have to choose between, am I going to earn money working in a supermarket doing this, or am I going to come to this meeting and that kind of thing. And so, of course, money and resource and funding does matter. But like you said, that power dynamic, I mean, I'll just give one more example. I worked on an event that looked around as science and religion some years ago. And I put months of free time into that and roped other people in. And we ended up having a really great event at our local museum. you know, really worked with others to enable that to happen with no money. The funder gave £300, which basically paid for the teas and coffees. Okay. But at the end, after that event, I received an email complaining that I'd allowed the women to pray at the event and I shouldn't have allowed them to do that, and reminded me in my kind of response to that, kind of how, for me, in my mind, I was thinking, how dare you ask me how I allowed grown adults to choose to do something like pray? You don't leave yourself at the door when you arrive. And it was about science and religion. And but what they did was remind me that they were the funder of £300. So that's so demeaning. And I would say, you know, you're not the funder. We were the funder. The people were the funder. The people who gave months of their time and effort to make that happen. So funder in the sense of depending what we think of as resources. Yeah.
Yeah.
Said my piece.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Anita. That you said what I was trying to say much more articulately and clearly and with good examples. Thanks. Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Okay. Years ago, someone contacted me about an idea. They saw that a local foundation, you know, the normal thing, you give grants and there's a reception for the grantees. What about the people who didn't get the grants? And I did have the idea of gathering the people who didn't get the grants together to share resources. I mean, it seems like such a valuable group of people of applying for grants, and then there's those who get it and those who don't. And it seems like there are more possibilities there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I'm really interested in too, Mary, because again, like I was coming at this with a lens of money primarily as like a resource that I'm interested in getting a better understanding around, because I feel like I have a lot of clarity about how we would use that and who would actually use that. And I actually think that's really important. Like for a big conversation, I think it's great to be big and open and dreamy. But when it comes to like actually mapping, I prefer to really focus on something that I can see is actually going to have some utility. And so there's been some ideas that have been rolling around in my head as a result of this conversation for sure, because I think I came in with like a little bit with more blinders on. But what you were saying, Mary, it would be really interesting, I think, for REAMP, especially to look at like, so when we do go through like a competitive process of funding, you know, who were the people who got funded and who didn't. And I can say from, you know, from past experiences in our network is, you know, I think in the past, we really have tended to want to fund the proposals that are really like, really well written. You know, maybe the outcome isn't as strong, or maybe it's not grounded in equity as much, but they're like very clear, like, you know, the deliverables are right there, right? And that's our tendency, is to want to gravitate towards those things that we really know, right? And we're familiar with, and we can see the pathway. And I think some of the other proposals that are less well written are sometimes more grounded in our values, but those outcomes are so much less clear. And I think if we could see that, it might challenge us to then think, okay, like what do we really need to think about as we're making decisions then? If like this is the thing we really want to fund, but we aren't feeling comfortable enough to do it, or we aren't making those decisions, what do we need to either change about our criteria, the way we're thinking about these, the way that we're viewing them, so that, again, we're really just putting our money where our mouth is.
It seems like you could do so much more by working in different ways with the whole group of people. I was just in a Zoom call where I guess it's a funding time that a few people were on the call that were rejected in the last week for funding, and they had these feelings of shame, which was really touching.
Yeah.
But I also see, I know the time, we're almost at the end, Mauricio from RSF Finance, and I know they have a shared gifting program. And I'm wondering if he has something to share in terms of ideas or any insights into mapping. Mapping. Maybe not.
Much. Maybe you didn't hear. I don't want to.
Yeah. Okay. Time is running short.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're out of time.
We've got another couple minutes. Do we want to, Sarah, we didn't talk about what to do as a wrap, or if there's any summarizing or closing.
Well, I mean, I don't know if, wow. I don't know if there's any summarizing necessarily. I mean, there was definitely like some similarities that we heard, right? Like, you know, going back to the Google Doc, right? Like people are really interested in doing this resource mapping because we want to know more about equity or inequity in the systems, right? And by seeing this, we think we can, you know, make more sense together, right? It might influence what your network is doing or how they're supporting different things or whatever. Like there seems to be some similarity around there. But I definitely heard a lot of differences too, right? Like there was definitely some differences in terms of like what those resources might actually be, right? Are we talking about just money? Are we talking about relationships? You know, are we talking about something else? And there definitely was a lot of differences around the implementation of it, right? People had a lot of different ideas of how you may start to approach this. In terms of next steps, you know, I guess we are going to have like a half hour to talk after this, and I'm going to stay for anybody who's interested. But I would be curious to know, and you can maybe put this in the chat or speak up, whatever you prefer. Is there anybody who is interested in maybe like continuing to dig into this conversation in a little bit deeper way? Maybe we could think about using the map that we put together for the network weavers, or maybe somebody else's map that may be interested in like taking a step forward to really think about like not just talking about this, but actually trying to do it. So we got a couple of thumbs up here. Okay. And Jim. Okay. Hang on. Are we grabbing these? Did somebody grab these? Doesn't matter who.
Are you getting them? Okay. So they're
I'm
Christine, Jim, who else? Catherine, was
Mary.
it? Mary. Was there something? Janos?
Anita.
Yep,
Anita Janos.
Fair. I'm sorry, I forgot your first name. Paulette? Pauline.
Paulette with Kep. I like to put Kepler Institute, so that's where I'm relegated to P and Fair. But Paulette Fair with Kepler.
I'll get that in my head. Jim, Catherine, Mary, Anita, Janos. Is there someone?
Well, there's actually quite a few people who might be interested in taking this on, huh?
I would love to contribute.
Who was that? Who said that? Oh, Mauricio? No. Brian. Looks like we've got a group. We've got some critical mass.
It looks like there is some critical mass. Yeah. Would somebody be interested? Like, I mean, I'm happy to maybe like set up the next call or lead it, or if somebody else in the group who's interested in this conversation too, is there any interest in maybe pulling together a second conversation here?
You know, Sarah, what I'm thinking actually is the next deep dive doesn't have a topic, and maybe we could just assign the next deep dive to go deeper on this instead of.
Okay, I'm cool with that.
Okay, that makes it simple for everybody because we don't have to Kara can go ahead and do what she does, do her magic.
And I would be willing to help somebody with a design if they want to lead that.
Oh, yeah.
Sarah, or I don't know.
Yes.
I don't want to lead it, but I would help think about it.
Does anybody else want to lead it? Is anybody willing to lead it? I would like to not lead it if I could get away with that.
I'd be happy to
perfect.
No particular topic in mind, but I mean, I'd be happy to assume responsibility for that. I can tag team with Jim and coordinate with Christine.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But I have to be responsible for facilitating.
And I can create any kind of Miro or Mentimeter or whatever kind of technical collaboration support tools are needed. I can be responsible for that. You just tell me what to do. Cool. I think we have a plan. So let's. let's release those who need to go at this top of the hour. So we have a little ritual for those of you is we all unmute and I'll count down. So everybody go ahead and get unmuted if you're willing to do this. And I'll count down, and when I get to 1, we just all give each other our blessings and our love and our greetings for the rest of the day. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Big hugs. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Looks like we have a good sized group.
That was a jam-packed hour. Nice.
Well, it apparently got enough people interested to care about the conversation afterwards. So I'm going to chalk that up with a win.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
If I could just say one thing, I've been reading Sandy Pentland's Social Physics, and it's all about idea flow and social learning. And it's very much about resources flowing through the network. And he has a lot to say about that, but he doesn't talk that much about relationships. And it really feels like an opportunity. And something about the way Robin Wald Kimmerer talks about how relationships are embedded into resource flow, and the things that I heard about power, how that modulates it, and funding. I think there's a really rich conversation here, and I think social system mapping is a really great way to visualize potentially some of those critical characteristics of the relationships that allow flow.
Yeah, this relationship question, Jim, is something I am particularly interested in. And a friend of mine she did a PhD in really looking at relationships and networks. And she's identified 3 types of relationships, like kind of summarized them down. There's tense relationships, right? Where it's like, there is confrontation maybe, or there's like some tenseness there, but they are required for some sort of reason. There's pragmatic relationships, right? Like, you just kind of have to have it. It's okay. It's not necessarily tense, but you're maybe not being like super supportive. And then there are supportive relationships. And what she's found is that those networks that are most high functioning have more of these supportive relationships than the other relationships. Not that those other ones don't exist. Every system needs a little bit of everything, but it's those supportive relationships that actually are a high determinant of how impactful your network is going to be moving forward. And so I think there's really something interesting to understand there about, like, again, like kind of thinking about my own network, like what are the relationships, right? Like somebody brought up that looking at the change in relationships could be a really powerful indicator in terms of resource flows. So I'd be interested to know for RAMP, like which relationships are really supportive in the network? Who are involved in those supportive relationships? What are we doing as a network to support them, or like, setting conditions for them to blossom in that way? Like, it could be really interesting, I think, to dig into more about that.
Jane Way-Skillen did a dissertation, I think, at Harvard on nonprofits and maybe networks, what made them successful, and came to a similar conclusion in terms of supportive networks, that those organizations that help promote, that built trust and promoted or empowered others, that were more of a constellation of leadership, were more successful.
Sorry, I'm new. I'm first time here. I'm not really just learn this community. Is there any project behind? I mean, is there a team who is develop the software solution for that what we speak about here, or is there already exists something? Because I tried find a way how can we bring together the offline and online world, because already one of the part of our life.
Yeah. Well, so my husband and I created a software tool called sumApp, which is designed to gather relationship data from network members, from known or identified network members, about a whole range of dynamics about how they relate to a social system. So our tool gathers the data, but it has specific constraints to that. And then we visualize the data in Kumu. And given the kind of the sort of the paradigm of data gathering and data visualization that we're using, we call social system mapping. So this group is generally people who are interested in social system mapping in some way. So, but the mapping of resources is a very complex thing, and it has a lot of, there's a lot of assumptions about transparency and power. So part of this discussion is to explore how could you start to visualize that. If people would just say, yeah, I get these resources from these people, openly and honestly, it would be really easy. The technology piece would be pretty easy. So there's a tool that can be used in that way, but not explicitly only in that way, and not without certain kind of limitations. For instance, you could just do research on who's funding what, but there's a whole layer of funding that you would probably not be able to see. So there's a tool that we're trying to figure out how to make it work in that way, but it's not. And so that's a strong kind of.
That's why I ask you, because I think the next social networks must include this kind of map. So I think in the next generation of Facebook or something like that for social purpose, and I think the visual information presentation, that's very important, and the system mapping as well.
Yeah. There's a guy that I've had some interactions with, for some collaboration with, who he's one of the, I don't know, an early promoter of the Let's system. He has a program called Open Money, which is a way of tracking exchanges that are in like complementary currencies or Let's and stuff. We've talked about taking his data and mapping it, but there's just all kinds of roadblocks that we ran into. But it's still it's still a thing in my head that would be great to get to someday, or to figure out, like a puzzle to solve.
I will be involved is there any technical team in this kind of, I will be joined or contribute somehow.
Are you a coder?
No, but I can bring, I learn different kind of, I discovered the open source world quite well.
Okay, cool, thanks, good to know. Other people, non-technical topics? Or overlapping? Brian, I'm wondering what you're thinking. You have, money is your main thing, so.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, the group I'm working with the California Donor Coalition, I think this whole social system mapping is something we need to start looking at if we want to expand. But a lot of people are still trying to figure out more internally how to put their project together. And people kind of assume that, okay, once I put this thing together, everybody's just going to follow along with it like the Pied Piper. And and these issues, the other thing I've got is that donor economics has like 9 environmental ceilings and about 20 different social foundations. And they kind of like see themselves putting up traffic signals. Don't go too fast and don't go past the climate thing, and go fast enough so we're taking care of poverty. And thinking that they get all these speed limits put up all over the highway, then the traffic is going to flow smoothly. but it's not, because these things talk to each other, okay? So it's a far more complex adaptive system than I think a lot of people are appreciating. So
Yeah.
trying to put these two things together, it's kind of like I'm thinking to myself, okay, I need to listen a little bit longer and, you know, get a feel of how this all works. So that's what I'm following along for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Mauricio has something he wants to say. I think, I know your internet is being weird, but does that, okay. Yeah. Well, okay, so he's not wanting to interrupt with broken internet. Do you want to type? Do you want to talk? Do you want to, I mean, we can wait while you come back, try to come back on visually, or, you know, just with your audio. Or if you want to just write to the chat and I'll just have us pause and read it. No, I'm not seeing anything. I'm bummed because I know you have something we all want to hear.
Yeah. In the meantime, Sarah, I was wondering whether the network academies, which involves funders, I don't know if you're continuing to do them, whether there's some prototyping or experiments that could happen within a group of funders.
Yes. Hi, Christine. Sorry. This is fascinating dialogue.
Yeah.
Do you listen to me? Do you have?
So sorry.
Oh. Darn.
No, we can't hear you.
You happen to hear me? Sorry.
We hear you in little bits, just a little and then nothing, and then a little and then nothing. Okay.
You know, that's to Mary, to your question, we did not host a Network Thinking Academy last year. We are hoping to host one this year. So I did jot that your idea down as something potential that we might do, you know, depending on if we host one and what the class size looks like.
Okay.
Yeah. The thing that is most, and Anita spoke to this, just time, like time, we all have the same amount of time. And if we're resource strapped economically, it makes it harder to make the kinds of decisions that we'd like to make. And I'm just really cognizant of how much, like, relationship building takes time, and understanding your network takes time, and listening, like doing the deep listening that's important, and doing the sensing. It takes not just patience, but it takes time, and a lot of time. And so just how that all fits together in terms of both the time that's being contributed as well as the money that's being contributed, and how those relate to one another and support one another or don't. It's just a really, big conundrum to me lately, and wishing there was ways of being able, if we could see the patterns of that, maybe then we could start to figure out how to shift them.
Yeah, sort of related to that, I feel like where the consequences of climate change in terms of depletion of human resources, that where so many leaders seem overworked and no one has time to respond, or even when there's something in front of them that really could meet their needs, they don't have time to even take that in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It's part of that colonizing picture
Yeah.
of on
Yeah.
the human side. Yeah.
Yeah. Mauricio.
And connect with Mary. Sorry. Connect with Mary. I think the competition is the problem between us.
Yeah. That's a
In
big
the climate organizations, they also see each other as competitors, not partners.
Yeah. Yeah. Mauricio, you're muted, but you want to try again?
Hi, Christine, you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, we can
This
hear you
is
now.
embarrassing.
No, don't be embarrassed. I'm sorry. I wish I could. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Well, this has been fascinating dialogue. Thank you all. I see a couple points I want to bring forth on the practicum, really, and as well on the more philosophical aspects of moving resources towards decision-making powers in grassroots communities. So we were talking about a month ago how regenerative are sources of capital, and yeah, we started with like ESG bonds and moving into strategic philanthropy, integrated capital pathways, and then kind of delving deeper into place-sourced financing, place-based, and the different infrastructure that is built behind these vehicles in community foundations that build credibility for place-based outcomes or projects or programs. And then I see a lot emerging into the participatory grant making aspects, and Sarah Ann has brought that as well in how the intermediary basically enables grassroots and give the decision-making power to acknowledge they are the change makers, and it's people power doing and organizing itself to drive something forth, or even giving circles, like place how people organize themselves to fund local projects in their communities, and it's no outside funding, it's just again people power moving forth. That's on the people power aspect of this dialogue. And then I see a lot of emergent dialogue in the foundations, families, offices on decolonizing philanthropy as well. Lots are talking about sunsetting their endowment, so that's really aligned with like the climate emergency and social discomfort emergency, and how to really move resources into actions needed now. So it's not about like a heaven for taxes, it's about leading with actions. And yeah, I wanted to put that forth, and there's amazing movements, projects, intermediaries doing fascinating work on this, on the dialogue we're bringing forth. So it's just moving the compendium of capital, the different sources of capital, to move forth and work for the benefit of all. And well, I know you, Christine, have been deeply engaged with Blue Marble, but they have been engaging philanthropy as well with principles-based evaluation, and how principles-driven strategies can really align into not outputs or inputs and activities, but really principles on the territorial level or on the philosophical level as well. So yeah, that'd be my 2 cents here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, it was great to hear we heard you the whole time. And we get a lot of important stuff to say. Thank you, Mauricio. Yeah.
I've also, this conversation also been thinking about the relationship between governance and community, and how those two concepts relate to each other, and how we can move from total community with little governance, because it's all us working together, to far greater governance separate, but still handling community. And there seems to be a changing balance or relationship about how we do things in different organizations. And that's also been something I've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks.
I have a question about, given all the things that we came up with in the Mentimeter about the sort of describing the richness of flow and the factors that condition it or modulate it or whatever, are there, besides the framework that Sarah offered about tense, practical, or supportive relationships, are there specific things about the relationships that would help us promote flow of all of those things? Are there different kinds of relationships that promote flows of different kinds of things? So in other words, is there some kind of a way of thinking about what it is we should measure in networks so that we can increase flow? And are there even ways to measure with the mapping the kind of flow that's actually happening? I mean, if flow is important, then we need to visualize it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think something that's it's not necessarily, when it's all connected, it's not necessarily following on from what you've just said, Jim, but thinking about my own work and how things and people move around, and there's different economies at work, different economies of trust and all those things that are part of a relationship. And where I mentioned earlier that I would draw on on other people's assets that they have, it wouldn't just be, it's never just taking it, it's reciprocal. And so we exchange. So where somebody may have allowed me to use their space, for example, I would give something back in another time. So there's time given back outside of that particular project, but it's given back. And it's almost an unspoken rule of flow of trust and reciprocity between people in a community that is not necessarily visible outside of that, and even mentioned or added up and talked about in that way. It's this kind of unspoken reciprocity that happens. And even sometimes thinking about how do I so I make a point of the different kinds of researchers, scientists, engineers, different kinds of people that are part of that collaborate with us. I have a point of making sure that at least 50% of those are from the community that we center in the work that we do. And, as part of, because there's an underrepresentation, that, that requires kind of ongoing, almost a programmed unconscious mining of, finding your way to those people. And I can map relationships to things like funerals, right? So my background is Caribbean, and in Caribbean culture, when somebody dies, the way you celebrate their life, you have a party as part of it. So you could mistakenly think you're in a wedding party, but actually it's a funeral after party, because it's the culture of how we do it. And so as part of that, there's a lot of socializing, storytelling, exchanging how you knew this person and how you're connected to the family. You exchange those stories with the people that you meet in the space. And often I found my way to people that then have worked with us, even through funerals. So it kind of thinks so I just wanted to mention that. I don't know how to share it any other way, but that there is always a give back, and it happens outside of that project. And whether it's something that you're funded to do or not, or paid to do or not, that give back has to happen, and it's unspoken, and it's part of the culture.
Mm-hmm. Janos.
Thank you. Similar to experience I have, I practice so many hackathons, and I find the problem is not in the individual persons But when they form a group or, for example, a project or something like the organization, a small organization, there starts something different thinking, and they can't find the common way or harder.
Mhm.
I don't know why this change. I know that's because the system where the project want to implement, that's work differently. I think so.
So we just have a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any last thoughts, summary thoughts, last thing they want to say?
One more thing to short, we have a logistics system and JIT and a lot of things, but we don't have operation system for all community. That's a problem. What we agree and can use all together.
I just want to thank you, Sarah, for bringing this up. I think it's a really potent topic, and it was really well organized. We crammed a lot in that first hour. It was a lot of good thinking. So much appreciated.
I really appreciate it too. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you all enjoyed it. I mean, I've definitely gotten something out of this too. You know, one of the things I'm thinking about, riffing off a little bit of what was said earlier, is, you know, in terms of resource flows, I'm also thinking now about like how we may show on a map, like what are the projects that REAMP is supported, to somehow have a way of people saying the ways that they've contributed to them. Like that could be really interesting. And then it might be really interesting to do what Jim was suggesting, is like, so for the relationships within that project, what do those look like? And as we look across different REAMP supported projects, are we going to see a difference in the types of relationships that we're seeing emerge? And does that tell us something about like the potency of that collaboration or that project that people are working on? That could also be really interesting and powerful. We may start to see some patterns then that help us again think about, you know, how we're allocating resources in the network in a way that really lives into our values.
Yeah, that would be powerful.
I'm happy to contribute, and thank you very much for this event. If I disturbed this team, really sorry. I didn't know a rule. I just thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. I think we'll wrap up. We'll do our little countdown thing again. There's so many of us here. So unmute if you're willing, able, and just 3, 2, 1. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you.
Obliged.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.